I shared in my last video some of the things that where people have misjudged me. And again, I don't hold any of those people responsible or anything like that. It caused me a lot of pain, but they didn't know that I had autism, and so they didn't know better. They were judging from what they saw and from what they knew. I said that I was done sharing about that, but I think I want to share a couple more experiences that I had as an adult, which were much more traumatic, especially the second one. And the reason that I want to share these, and hopefully I won't get really upset as I'm sharing them, they still are difficult. And one of these people I'm still having a hard time forgiving. So there's the psychologist and then this pastor, the second pastor. And I know I need to forgive them, and I'm trying to, and I keep, you know how sometimes you forgive, but then it comes back. So you have to keep forgiving. So God's helping me with that. Anyway, so I felt that it was important to share these two experiences because it shows how much you can traumatize someone when you make assumptions about their behavior. In some ways, these two, they're both pastors. In some ways, these two pastors, the assumptions that they made were to be expected, maybe in some degree, because, I didn't know I had autism. No one knew I had autism. And so they weren't going from that viewpoint. But I think the thing that you need to keep in mind when dealing with someone who has autism, and really with anybody, is don't jump to conclusions. Ask questions. Try to find out what's going on. And someone with autism may not be able to explain it. I wasn't able to explain it. But I did try to explain it in the second case, but my explanation I don't know if it didn't make sense or it didn't cut it or what, but so the first experience, and again, I'm not sharing this to blame anybody. I'm just sharing it to help people with understanding. In the church that I was in at that time, I had been asked pretty much every year to come up with what our church was going to do for Christmas time, for Advent, and for basically the month of December. Again, it was a Protestant church. It wasn't Catholic. It wasn't, one of the high churches. And so Advent wasn't, it was kind of a nebulous thing. But anyway, so I'm very creative. That's one of my quote unquote superpowers. And, if you don't know what I'm talking about, go back to my first video because I talk about autism and superpowers and thorns in the flesh and stuff. Anyway, so I liked putting those things together. It really was very fulfilling for me, and our church really enjoyed it. So this one year I'd worked really hard on coming up with short plays for each of the weeks and other things that went around that. And my pastor at one point said, we're going to change this and we're going to put 2 of your plays on one week so that we can have the choir. They want to do some of the Hallelujah chorus. That's a perfectly reasonable request, okay? But for a person with autism, when you change things, that's really, really difficult. So for example, just so you have an idea of this, I'm now Catholic, okay? And the priest always goes over to the ambo to give his homily. One time, my priest just stood up where he was for whatever reason. I'm not sure if he had a backache or what, but he just stood up where he was. I cried for 2 weeks because there was that change. Okay, it was an unexpected change. It really, really bothered me. But just so you know, that little tiny thing, I cried for 2 weeks. Seriously, I just bawled for 2 weeks because having a change like that. So going back to the story I'm telling you about the pastor changing the schedule of things, when you look at it reasonably and intellectually, big deal. So we're going to have 2 of my plays on one Sunday. That's great. And the choir singing some of the Hallelujah chorus. That is so amazing. That's so awesome. We had a small, very non-professional choir. And so that was really, really special. So, normally somebody would be okay with that, right? But for me, just any change was very, very difficult. And I don't remember exactly how I responded to him, but I must have, like said, no, that's not okay, or something like that, because he called me a prima donna and he was really upset. And I don't think I was asked to do the Christmas after that. And it wasn't him that would ask me, but it was the worship committee. But I don't know if he said something or what. But anyway, so my behavior wasn't okay. And again, no blame on anybody, but that's just to help you guys understand what it's like being autistic. So another time that was much, much more traumatic for me, and this affected me for a long time. I think it still kind of affects me even to this day. I'm starting to cry. Sorry. I was running kind of a school in our church for adults, that we call School of Discipleship. And I would write the curriculum and teach it. I'd teach 2 or 3 classes of that. And then I would bring in one of the other leaders from the church who I would teach to teach it so they could take over so that I could write another class and do that and so on. And we had a schedule, we told people it's going to go from here to here on the calendar. And so one time our church was having a band come and play at the church on the night that we normally would be meeting. And, we were meeting in a different room. We weren't meeting in the main auditorium, so that was fine. But our pastor wanted all the people from the class to come and be chaperones, I guess you'd say, at the concert, because this was for the teens. It was incredibly loud. Anyway, that really, really upset me because we've got this particular time. And again, I want to say at this point, my pastor wasn't being unreasonable. That was a perfectly reasonable thing to want to do. It did kind of mess up with the schedule a little bit, but you can be flexible. What was the problem was that he then took me after church one Sunday, he and his wife sat next to me, and he tore me apart for 4 hours. I went through a box and a half of Kleenexes. And his wife at one time reached over to hug me, and he said, "Don't you hug her, because then I'll have to start breaking her all over again." So he felt that he needed to break me. And I do think that that's unreasonable. People do unreasonable things all the time. We all do. So again, he wasn't like a monster because of that or something, because we all do things that are unreasonable. We're all sinners. But this one, just to say, this really, really traumatized me. I wasn't trying to be horrible or anything like that. But change is very, very difficult for somebody on the autism spectrum. And again, nobody knew. I didn't even know that I was autistic at that time. But tearing somebody apart for 4 hours is a little ridiculous. But he broke me. And the next class that I taught was about what a blessing it is to be broken. Basically, he brainwashed me. And so that was an over the top response to someone who's autistic. And again, he didn't know I was autistic, but just an over the top response. But that kind of thing, I think it probably would have traumatized pretty much any woman, and possibly some men, I'm not sure. But for someone who's autistic, who's really trying to be good and everything, that kind of thing was, I didn't understand why I was being punished, or as he said, broken. And like I said, I'm still pretty much traumatized by this. And that was at least 20 years ago, probably closer to 30 years ago. That was just a really horrible experience. I stayed in that church for quite a while longer, until we moved actually to Tennessee. It was in California. And I stayed there where I had been so traumatized because I genuinely thought there was something wrong with me. I had done this horrible, horrible thing. And it wasn't good to disagree with the pastor. It wasn't good to be so inflexible, but that was because of my autism. And his response was just so over the top. I'm sharing this. I really debated sharing it because I think that that was an unusual experience. But I know that other autistic people have gone through similar things, especially people who are farther on the autism spectrum, because they can't explain themselves. And I wasn't able to explain myself either because I didn't know that I had autism. But a lot of them, they just know that they're being treated somehow, and it's very confusing for us because we often don't. Some people on the spectrum don't understand it all. Some of us have just a lot of confusion, but we understand some things. But we often don't understand societal norms. We don't understand nuances. Like, to me, everything's black and white. It's very hard for me to see nuances, even when people really, really explain them to me. And I definitely, have a difficult time seeing those nuances on my own without any explanation. So just be kind to people. If you know that they're autistic, definitely, definitely, definitely be kind to them. But if there's somebody who's just acting kind of weird, or you think that it's unacceptable, talk with them, try to find out why, and please go easy on them. Find out, are they really trying to be rebellious before you totally condemn them? I have been through so much condemnation in my life. I could tell you many, many more stories, but I've been through so much condemnation in my life that I now know is because I am autistic, but I didn't know that at the time. And so I couldn't explain that. But people just assumed that I was being rebellious. And because I was so compliant, that really, really bothered me and honestly traumatized me. A number of my experiences have traumatized me. And I'm not saying that to say, feel sorry for me. I'm saying that to say, please be careful. Be careful with other people in general, because a lot of people are tender and sensitive, and they mean well, and they're really trying to be good, but they don't understand things. And so jumping to conclusions about people can really, really hurt them, and it can hurt them for a very, very long time. So, okay, I don't really know how to wrap this up, but use that for, watching over your own behavior, but also please pray for those on the spectrum, because they are probably experiencing kind of similar things. A lot of them are misunderstood, mistreated, and traumatized by people's behavior toward them because of their autism, whether they know that they're autistic or not. So pray for protection, pray for healing. And just pray that we experience God's love, because when you have something like that happen, it can make you feel like there's something super, super wrong with you, and therefore God cannot love you. So it's really important for everybody to understand that God does love them. I've struggled with that a lot throughout my life. And when I look back at it, it's pretty much rooted in how I was treated because I was autistic. Okay, I love you all. I don't know, like I said, I don't know how to wrap this up. I love you all. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.